Hello everyone, thanks for listening to this panel. This is a comics panel for Inconceivable 2020, an online indie convention, and the title is called Post-COVID Comics, Where to From Here. And here we'll be discussing the direction of comics and comics-related industries in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm your moderator, Queenie Chan, and I'm acting as a panelist as well. So to introduce myself, I'm a manga-style comic book artist whose first published work was The Dreaming, which with the US-based publisher Tokyo Pop. I've also worked as an illustrator for best-selling authors Dean Koontz and Carly Chan. So I'm currently working on a series of biographical comics on historical queens called Women Who Were Kings, and next year I'll be doing a PhD on mixing comics and video games together. So I've got several guests with me today to talk about this topic. Many thanks to them for participating. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting with you, Mal.
Hi, I'm Mal Briggs. I'm a co-owner at Impact Comics in Canberra. I've been selling comics for 18 years. I hope I can add a little bit of insight. I'm curious to hear everyone else's insight as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Mal. So Kai?
Hi, I'm Kai. I'm an artist who's been trained in Tokyo and had a serialized manga very briefly. These days, I'm an animation and art director on various projects. I've done one with Planet Dolan, and right now I'm working with the local animation studio Destruna. And I'm hoping I can bring a lot of how we've coped with COVID to the panel.
Right, thank you. And Sarah?
Hi, I'm Sarah Winifred Searle, and I mostly make graphic novels these days. I'm originally from the US, but right now I live in Perth, and that's where I plan on staying for the foreseeable future. So it's nice to be part of an Australian comics thing right now. So last year, this book came out, Sincerely Harriet.
Right.
You can get it at pretty much any bookshop can order it for you. And right now I'm finishing up a graphic novel for First Second, which will be a young adult fictionalized memoir, so that's pretty exciting. And you might recognize my work from, I've worked on a few licensed titles as well, like Gem and the Holograms and Adventure Time, and some other stuff. So,
Right, well, thank you very much, Sarah. So let's begin by chatting about how the COVID-19 shutdown, both locally and globally, has affected comics and other arts-related industries. Of course, non-comics related discussion is also welcome here. Do you have any comments you'd like to make about that, Mal, in terms of the comics industry on a more global level?
So the comics industry, and when Australian and most Western shops say the comics industry, they mean an extension of the American comics industry, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
We got hammered. The initial wave of shutdowns really, on top of what was happening here in Australia, it was hitting America really, really hard. And there was shutdowns in warehouses, there was shutdowns in printers, and stores were getting ordered to not open and not allowed to go into their stores. There was pallet loads of stock being sent back undeliverable to the distributors. And so at the end of March, the major distributor in the US, Diamond Comics, suddenly, like I think we got 1 week's notice or something, that they were just stopping distributing comics until further notice. So at that stage, we didn't even know how long it was going to be. It ended up just under 2 months. And so we literally had no new releases, and in Australia, we weren't able to get restocks. In some US stores, we were able to get restocks. But yeah, we weren't able to get new releases. Fortunately for us as a store, we have diversified our supply chains enough that we deal quite a lot with book distributors to get a lot of our graphic novel and manga and all of that stuff. So it wasn't as a dramatic shutdown for us as it was for some stores, but some stores were dealing exclusively with Diamond. And so they literally went from, here's a pallet load of stuff every week to I have nothing new next week. And in states like South Australia and that didn't really get hit very hard and didn't have to tell everyone stay home, that was pretty hard for some of the retailers. It was hard for us. We had all the people who work around here staying at home, so they weren't coming in and browsing. And on top of that, they were hearing, there's no new comics, so there wasn't that incentive to come out and and have a look for stuff. So like that was the major one that really hammered us. But yeah, there has been knock-on effects to flights not being available for stock to be on, and release schedules of other stuff. Even once things got going, release schedules were off, and restock schedules are inconsistent. And even now, when we're not getting restocked on stuff weekly from some sort of when they get around to it, because they're running their warehouses at skeleton staff. So yeah, it's a really unusual time. It's a time to really sort of be nimble and be ready to change and pivot onto like, well, what can I get in and what can't I get in, and keep moving. Yeah.
Has it kind of motivated you to boost your online presence? Because I'm sure most stores these days would have some kind of web store. Has it motivated you?
Yeah. Well, we already had a web store, but we weren't keeping it as exhaustive. We were sort of putting stuff up bits and pieces. We scaled that up really fast to get as much of our stuff on there as we could. Some stores in the US literally didn't have point of sale software. Like their tracking was pen and paper. And so they were scaling up. Shopify loaded up so many comic shops to Shopify so fast. And that, getting online really was a thing that saved some of the shops. I know shops here in Australia who'd sort of been putting off having an online store were suddenly, especially in Melbourne, where they got shut down for months on end. If they didn't get themselves online, they literally had no way to sell stock. So the push to online. And as I'm in Canberra, we never really got shut down hard, and we've not had any local transmission. So we've felt not as restricted as a lot of other places have most of the time. But even here, 10% of our sales now have seemed to have permanently moved online. It doesn't feel like they're coming back. So yeah, we're having to really rethink the logistics of the way we manage stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Mal. That was quite fascinating. And while we're on the subject of where the lockdowns are happening, Kai, you're in Melbourne. What are your experiences of the event?
Well, I've experienced the full extent of the lockdown, where we weren't able to really go anywhere or do anything for the past, what feels like 7 months.
Can you clarify a little bit about what you do? You said you mentioned animation.
Yeah. I was in comics exclusively until about a year and a half ago, at which point I started directing animation for a YouTube channel. And then we've moved from the YouTube channel to a series that we're producing right now. And the ironic part was, me and my partner Dolan, my business partner or my boss or whatever you want to call him, we found an office. We moved into the office in March, and then we got shut down not too long after that. It was, I guess we're just going to pay rent with this new company we formed for the office, but not actually use it. So that was extremely frustrating. And like we had animators coming in, right? And I was able to look over their shoulder and like communicate with them directly. But then as soon as we had to take everything off site and take everything back home, I'm sitting at my work desk talking to you now, the one I've had to set up at home. All of that communication had to switch to, we had to use Discord. We've been in Discord meetings all day during the work hours. But even so, there's no visual indicator of being able to just say, this bit here, I want you to shift that over. The communication has strongly affected how we're able to interact with each other and how quickly we're able to produce our work.
Right. Yeah. So have you been using software like Zoom? I mean, for the process during the time of this COVID-19 situation, there's been a massive boost of online activity. And some people have kind of adapted to it. Some businesses seem to have kind of been able to change around. I mean, you mentioned a bit of difficulty about not being able to work in the same room with each other, as animators. Yeah. Is there any kind of online kind of help that you can get that is a little bit better than Zoom, I guess?
Oh yeah, I much prefer Discord, honestly. I'm not sure why the industry as a whole decided that Zoom, no offense to Zoom, was the the way to go, but I guess it just had, you know, the industry looking at it. Discord's been very helpful. We've also used a tool called Shotgun, which is an industry tool for going over different shots from a production and saying, oh, this needs adjusting. And I can actually draw over that and send it back to the animators. And so if they're really not getting it, I can just literally animate the scene on top of what they've given me and say, no, 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 like this, which is a technique we're kind of cribbing from Glenn Keane's work on Tangled, where he would come into the 3D animation and just start drawing his animatics on top. So we've been using that as a means to get past some of those production difficulties. But another part of our system is we also use a bit of motion capture. And as someone who's in charge of how the animation will turn out, it's been really difficult to try to direct people who aren't in the first place actors or animators.
Or in the same place as you.
Or in the same place as me. Like, I'll see the motion capture come through a week after it was filmed and go, really? That choice? Okay, we'll go with it. And sometimes the animator will grab it and use it as a basis for something, and sometimes we both go, nah, that's just not going to work. We'll have to throw that out. Because we had installed at our office, it's now at my boss's home, an IPI soft dual connect motion capture system set up so that we could easily just sketch out animations per scene as we needed them. But it's turned into this exhaustive process with two people that I'm not face-to-face with on weekends are going in and shooting mocap unsupervised. So you get back what you're going to get back. It's interesting.
Right. Do you see this becoming a permanent part of your workflow?
No, we're actually hoping that tomorrow we're going to get an announcement that will see us going back to work, because it has been, like, I've been working from home for years. So any other year of my life, this would have been, oh yeah, business as usual. I'll just stick to my drawing and I'll keep going. But this was the 1 year that he and I both decided, no, we're going to have a legit location and use that power of in-person communication. It was not the right year to act on it. But we're going to look at, as soon as it's legally and legal and safe to do so, we're going to move back into the office. We're going to be able to communicate again. And we're really hoping that will help us tie up this first season, because we've gone way over time. Like, we've had a bit of job helper come in, job keeper, I think it's called.
Yeah, job keeper.
Yeah, and that's helped our business out, because we have lost a lot of hours we'll never recover in production to having to mitigate all of these different circumstances. Like, at one point, we only had one license for a piece of software, and someone else needed to use the studio's license of that software. So someone had to drive into the office, unhook that piece of software from the work computer, drive back home, and then reactivate it on... It would have taken 2 seconds to do that if we were still in person. So we're not looking at permanently having people online. However, we have had an intake of international talent. So we got someone from, I think we got at least one from America. We got someone from France. We got someone from Japan.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's added a bit of international flavor. But the Melbourne group, we're hoping to get back together, and even in the future, when borders open up, bring some of our international people into the studio and have them set up and get them desks and get them working with us. So the road to recovery is long, but we're optimistic.
Right. Thanks, Kai. That was quite fascinating. But I find it interesting that, unlike Mal, who sees a kind of maybe permanent shift in his business and the way he conducts business, you seem to think that once the COVID crisis is over, you'll just go back to business as usual, maybe with a little bit of difference.
I guess part of it really depends on how other countries are handling the crisis, because until we get a vaccine, it's not going to be normal. But particularly because we're not we have the advantage of, unlike poor Mal, not being a face-to-face retailer. So if we have a controlled amount of people entering and exiting the studio, we can take our precautions. We were sanitizing, in January. I had a big jug of sanitizer on my desk immediately when this stuff started happening. And we were so I think that in that essence, we have a leg up on retail, which is unfortunate, because we want retail to start back up. And Mal, I want you to be able to get some of those back issues.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Kai. So, Sarah, you're in Perth and you do something that's very different to Mal and Kai. Would you like to talk about how COVID has affected you and the way you interact with your publishers?
Yeah, sure. So I mostly work with trade book publishers that are based in the United States. So something that ended up happening is like most of my work right now is with First Second, who's part of Macmillan, who are in New York City. So my day-to-day schedule, like my routine, didn't change really because I'm in the middle of a huge 350-page book, and I was inking all year this year, and that was it. That was my job, just ink 350 pages. So I just kind of put my head down and worked on that, and there was a lot happening on their end, but I think because I was not
Remote.
there, and in Perth, which has been one of the luckiest places in Australia, and absolutely in comparison to the US, where like things are almost normal again here. But like for example, a lot of editors and other people working at publishers in New York City have actually temporarily moved out of the city because a lot of them have families.
Work from
And
home.
yeah, so they've just been working from home and say like somewhere in New England. Um, so that's been interesting, kind of hearing life updates like, oh, we're in Massachusetts now, the just for the time being, just because our kids really needed some space and we could not handle it. So that's been interesting, but really it hasn't affected me much.
Wow.
And yeah, I think I've been really lucky, but it has like, as I think that from my perspective, I can speak most about how it's affected like the acquisition of new books from the trade book publisher side, and also for like licensed comics and
Yeah.
like Big Two and stuff as well.
Has it stalled, like in your opinion, or is everything going fine? Or
When things first got really serious several months ago, there were some series cancellations and there were some issues. But something about trade book publishing is everything moves really slowly, and they're planning several years into the future at any point. A lot of their books are taken on knowing that they won't be out for 2 or 3 years. So like I think even though they needed a bit of a break to figure out how to make things work for them in the time being, they're still looking ahead. And I don't know if the others in this panel saw this news, but the graphic novel sales, like that particular market in the States, had a 42% increase in sales in the past quarter, which is astronomical. It's just like unbelievable. And it's mostly stuff like, and it's not even stuff like Marvel and DC, it's things like Dogman. Yeah.
Dogman is apparently America's best-selling comic right now.
Yeah, Dogman rules North America right now. It's amazing. And the fact that, like, if you think about it, people are stuck at home. They aren't able to find entertainment in the ways that they usually do. So they're going to lean heavier on things like streaming and book sales. So, yeah, I feel encouraged by that. I'm very, very privileged and fortunate in that I'm in such a lucky spot right now. But that was encouraging to me, at least, because we've seen a lot of growth in graphic novels already, and this just kind of, it was already positioned to take off, and this really was amazing the past few months.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Sarah. That was quite interesting, and it's good to see that you have such a peaceful story. Since I live in Sydney, I might as well mention how things are going here. Pretty much all the comic conventions I normally go to have been cancelled, and that's been the whole year. So no Supernova this year or Comic Con, which is very sad. A lot of no local cons as well. So that has been a bit devastating to a lot of people. And I kind of miss the con-going circuit because apart from being able to talk to people, I also see a number of people that I don't see anywhere else. So not being able to chat to people and keep up with the industry news is a little bit sad. And even though, given the state of the comics industry in the US, particularly with all the changes going on in Marvel and DC, I don't think people would have that much, exciting stuff to talk about. And as Sarah said that a number of publishers, trade publishers, have kind of pushed back or cancelled their slate of books, the ones that have not already been commissioned. So I guess on that front, people are looking a little bit gloomy as well. However, I have noticed an uptick of workshops that are being organised by local councils and libraries and schools sometimes. So I've done a number of those, which is kind of interesting. For once, because Zoom has been, the uptake on Zoom has been so quick and people seem so open to new kinds of technology. I find that doing workshops online has been great for me as well, and that I could do it without leaving home. I think one of the weirdest things about doing online workshops with libraries is that I actually find it very hard to gauge the reaction of the people who are actually doing the workshop. When I'm doing workshops in real life, I'm able to see people, drawing and, looking up, smiling. Okay, it's like getting really into it. When I do a workshop on Zoom and I have to share a screen, I often cannot really see what all the other people's reactions are, and people turn off their cameras as well because I guess they don't want want everyone to just watch them drawing, and it's like I have no idea whether anyone's enjoying this workshop or not. They hate it, they're being bored to death, and it's like I can't tell. But so far I've had a lot of positive comments, so I just take that as a good thing. I guess it's also interesting to see that younger folks seem to have no trouble with the Zoom thing. They see it as good as a real person showing up and drawing on the board. So I'm glad I have a drawing tablet, just bought it at the end of last year, that I could actually use for Zoom and actually have some good results. Yep, so these are my experiences in Sydney. And so Inconceivable is a con that we started because no cons this year, might as well do something even if it's virtual. Okay, well, the next question I have is, what is the light at the end of the tunnel? When do you see things picking up and why? So Mal, we'll start with you.
So things are starting to pick up for us already, but the transfer to online is changing the way we do things. Comics is one of those funny things that, I've been doing this across a couple of decades now, and so it's all about watching as the industry moves and making sure as a store you move with it and get in the right place. When I started was when Tokyo Pop was just entering the market, and after years of manga trying to reformat for American audiences, they went, look, let's just do the tankobon form and put them out and leave them in the right to left format, and things like Fruits Basket and Love Hina and all of that just sort of exploded. And then, when we saw waves of that sort of stuff, things change along the way. And as we were talking before about Dogman, that sort of explosion. I mean, Dogman's coming out from Scholastic. Scholastic bought the rights to Jeff Smith's Bone and created an imprint with graphics, basically for Jeff Smith. And from that, you got graphics, you got Bone, and you got Amulet, and you got Raina Telgemeier's stuff, and then, and Dogman and all of that. And now what we're seeing is your traditional comics companies are chasing that. So DC are doing things like this. They're taking traditional DC characters and they're packaging them up in a book aimed at either kids or young adults or teens in that original graphic novel format that Sarah's knee deep in. That's where we're going now. What's really interesting though is hearing Sarah talk about, and obviously the lead-in time on producing an original graphic novel like that is much longer. Comic books, traditional American pamphlet style comic books, one of the things with them is they're nimble, that it takes about 30 days to make a 22-page comic book, like across the team of people. So you're really dealing at most about 3 months in advance. They'll have plans further out than that, but they can cancel or greenlight a new book literally 3 months out. But something like these, they've got to be planning a year out. They've got to be signing contracts a year, 2 years out. And so that's got to be, it's an interesting thing because that's where the nimble part of the market is shifting towards those graphic novels, and we're restructuring our shelves and stuff with that in anticipation.
Yeah.
We've got a growing young adult section and all of that sort of stuff. But I'm interested as that expansion into that market matures, will change come slower because those plans need to be made 2-3 years out as opposed to 3-4 months out.
Yeah.
So yeah, at the moment, yeah, definitely the way we're going is, yeah, we're pivoting towards more and more of that original graphic novel stuff aimed at the kids, the teens, and the young adults. And it's a sort of thing that we literally buy box loads of whatever the next thing coming in is. DC are chasing it. They just promoted the editor from that line is now the chief editor of their entire line. Marvel have just signed a deal with Scholastic that Scholastic are going to be doing partnership books to do that into that same sort of market. So yeah, it's everybody's chasing that market. That's definitely the way we're looking at it going. We're expanding into the libraries more and more, mail order more and more.
Would this, do you think this spells the end of the floppy model? The serialized superhero floppy model, if one actually do superheroes themselves. So this is a controversial kind of opinion.
It is a controversial thing. So I don't think it spells the end. I don't think we'll ever see the end of those. The end of those was predicted over 10 years ago when digital comics came out and the iPad got released. And that, again, that went up to about 10% of the market and just plateaued.
Just to clarify a few things, in the ebook market, it was also predicted that ebooks will overtake print books, but that hasn't happened. From my understanding, the figures are ebooks have plateaued at 25% of the total market, and among the young, it's actually shrinking. Apparently, young people prefer physical books, and so it's interesting to compare that with comics figures, where Comixology, we don't have exact figures from Comixology, but the general estimate is that 10% of all comics market is actually e-comics, and so that hasn't even gotten to the point of ebooks in prose. So it is interesting to see that comics is actually a different market and judged differently. So you would agree with that, I imagine, in that the physical aspect of comics is actually very important to its
it's very important. Now what's interesting, again, talking about DC and their plan with the original graphic novels, hidden in amongst their announcements of that stuff was they also promoted the person who was in charge of their digital first line. And they've said that they're looking at doing more digital first. One of the things they're doing that's a little bit different to a lot of the others is they're doing smaller. They're basically making something that the page format looks like a traditional comic, but the format itself is more akin to the Japanese model, where you're only releasing sort of 10 pages, 8 pages of a story, a chapter, rather than a bigger chunk. And they're doing that with a lot of what they're calling digital first titles. And then they're down the track, the popular ones are then getting re-released as single issues, sort of 3-4 of those chapters into a single issue. And then that single issue will get released into a collected volume down the track. So it appears what their plan is to focus a lot more on that digital first format than the traditional 22-page comic. So beyond March, we don't know what DC have locked in. Again, about 3 months is what we've got to work with. We know that the start of 2021, they're doing a big line-wide sort of possible future thing called Future State, where you see like the next generation of all the characters, and it's sort of done in 2 months. And traditionally they do these things sort of as a gear change to a relaunch somehow. So come March, DC could be out of doing the traditional floppy comic in the way that we know them. And if they chose that line, the real interesting thing would be, what does the rest of the market do? Do Marvel then follow them? Or do Marvel go, cool, we own the shelves, and start flooding us with like twice as much content to stop the smaller publishers, inching their way in there and taking over? Because that's the other thing too, is a lot of the smaller publishers are getting terrific ground. Superheroes are not the commanding force anymore. Like, I mean, in raw numbers, DC and Marvel have a big chunk, But again, it's nothing compared to like Raina Telgemeier and Dav Pilkey are doing in Scholastic books. But as far as traditional comics on the shelves, though, the things that are winning awards, the things that are getting noticed beyond the speculators, beyond the people who just buy superheroes because that's what they know. There's, you know, Boom and Image and all heaps of the B and C list publishers are producing amazing stuff, and there's new publishers coming along like AWA Upshot and all of these guys. There's heaps of interesting stuff, but nearly all of those guys they're totally ready. If traditional comics disappeared, so many of those guys are completely ready to pivot straight to a straight to volume, straight to graphic novel format. And you see that quite often. They'll do like, our sales on single monthlies isn't as big as what it is when it finally gets collected. We're just not going to waste our time doing those pamphlets anymore, which means that the economics, like part of the reason they stuck to pamphlets for so long is the economics. You get that little bit of cash flow every month. You're not paying creators for 2 years advances and everything, and then booking a giant print run to get a warehouse full of books before you start seeing the cash come in. Whereas, traditional comics, it's like, you're getting a few bucks every month coming in, and it evens out the cash flow. But, if those guys are geared up economically to go straight to the book market and do the big print run and the warehousing of the books, and that then there's really, the market's ready. Kids don't buy traditional comics. Kids buy Dogman in book form.
Yeah, that is totally true. Anyway, Sarah, do you have anything to add to what Mal has said? I think we can agree that the kids book market, if not the kids book market, is definitely here to stay, and it's definitely making a lot of money. While I'm not saying that superheroes or floppies are going to disappear anytime soon, though the business model may change. Obviously, even as Mal has showed, the graphic novels that they are targeting tend to be about a different kind of superhero and a different kind of demographic that they're targeting. What do you think of that, Sarah? And do you have anything that you'd like to say about that? Obviously, the future's bright for you.
I think what's happened is, so right before all of this happened, like last year really, we had a big surge in trade book publishers deciding that it was time for them to get serious about graphic novels.
Cool.
So we had Random House Graphics announce that they were starting to do their own sort of imprint especially for those kinds of books.
Awesome. So how did you actually get involved in that then?
So I always, well, not always, but for a very long time, I was just like, okay, I think this is the kind of book that I want to make. So I just made sure that I kind of started making stuff like that and was networking with the right people to pitch and stuff. But something that I think is really interesting to think about for the future is like a lot of publishers were like, okay, like graphic novels are making really great sales. We should position ourselves to take advantage of that. And at this point, I think we're seeing a lot of their risks pay off with the huge upswing in sales. And it's not like we can rely on any of this as like any sort of pattern that we can predict how they're going to be doing next year. But I think it does. Oh, my cat's here to say hi. We can use this to just be like, all right, like I think hopefully they'll feel justified in making those decisions, and they'll continue to invest in books so that they have a continuing catalog through the years. And at least for that part of the industry, I feel fairly hopeful.
Yeah, well, that's great. According to Mal, at least the sales are certainly showing there. So you're in a great position. So anyway, Kai, you're doing animation, right? And I've noticed a lot of articles recently talking about some of the problems that they've had filming live action series. And I don't know if you've heard, but even certain live action series had cartooning specials being done. So rumor has it on the internet that animation is actually on the upswing. And there is, of course, a massive global audience for animation. Anime is doing quite well. I'm not saying that you're doing anime, but despite the COVID-19 crisis, Demon Slayer in Japan recently had their movie, And it's gone totally viral, and it made $100 million at a box office, one of Japan's biggest records. And so where do you think the animation industry will be heading?
Well, yeah, as you said, animation is actually a huge ticket right now, because a lot of shows, I don't know if anyone caught the ending of a series called Empire, but it infamously, they could not get through to shoot the last couple of scenes. So in the final episode of this long-running, I assume, a dramatic series, they replace some key shots with what looks like pre-viz 3D, and that was what made it to air. Which was a bit awkward for them.
Good or bad 3D are we talking about?
Bad like not 3D you would want in your final show, and that is not me holding any of those animators responsible. They obviously had like a day to punch out some of these scenes really quickly with previous graphics, but just the schedule and COVID and everything obviously really messed them up. But
poor showrunners.
Yeah, I feel really bad for them and the animators. They probably had to yell at and say, "We need it out of the door yesterday." Yeah, there has been a lot of animation production going on, and a lot of shows are doing really well. Like I really loved Keeper on Netflix. Like we're not just seeing animation, we're not just seeing tween graphics animation. We're actually seeing a huge movement trying to bring us back to traditional animation, like with stuff like Castlevania, Kipper, and the Age of Wonder Beasts. There's a whole lot of love for stuff like Legend of Korra and Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Voltron was doing well for a little while there until those last couple of seasons. But on the whole, I think we're going to see people investing in animation, mostly because you don't have to worry about any of the extra stuff you have to do with acting in person. There's going to be a whole lot more procedure for people going onto a set than there is for people who have to, as we did, because we've had our cast recording already, get together on a Zoom call and be recording on their end and then have us mix it on our end to match up. Mm-hmm. So that's absolutely astute. Some of the issues could still be with production communication, but on the whole, I think animation's in a really good place. It's interesting you brought up Demon Slayer because, as I understand, the American industry in terms of cartoons and comics is third, like a distant third on the economy compared to France and Japan, mm-hmm. who are way up the top with their own like selling to themselves and selling to each
Massive
other.
Machines.
Yeah. I really love this one show from France called Last Man, and they just don't sell it here, which is a huge problem for me. So it's interesting to hear that even in Japan, we're seeing a surge in the appreciation for animated films in particular. It was really good to hear. And there was, I don't know what the numbers were for Anime Lab's release of Akira. Akira did a show around, like they did a cinema tour, like a limited screening. Mm-hmm. It didn't come to Victoria, but yeah, I was really happy to see that. I would really love to hear that it was doing well.
Right. I've also heard some rumors about, because general, conventional, real people Hollywood is kind of slumming it a little bit, both in the acting department and also in the production department. So a lot of shows having been put on hold, the writer's room has been largely unemployed. And there has been some bit of a feathers ruffled on the internet because people have suggested that a lot of these TV writers go into animation, as if it's a category where they can just slum it for the time being before the COVID goes away and we can all go back to normal. So what do you think about that? And has that, does that annoy you or?
Well, I certainly think that a lot of people who are in Hollywood, script writing, screenwriting, and that kind of thing, some of them understand that the needs for animation are different, but it wouldn't surprise me if a few of them thought, oh, animation is probably easy to write for. Animation is incredible to write for. You have to be so much more specific in your script because you're not just providing an actor with the backbone of their performance, you're also detailing to the animators and the staff what the action is and what the priority of focus is in the scene. So you can't just rely on do the script and let the actors handle it and then shoot it on the day and hope it works out. It's much more intricate. And it requires, like, we have a team of storyboarders as well. So we have to communicate with them. They're the first people to get our script. The last people to get our script really are the people who are recording their voices for it. So if you think that if you are a Hollywood writer and you're somehow seeing this and you believe that you're going to have an easier time, tiptoe in carefully. We have enough animated sitcoms. You do not want to write for Family Guy. What I'm really hoping to see in the future is a step away from that traditional, I say traditional, that modern adult animation format where we have one camera and we sit at that one camera frame sitcom style and people just come on and they do talking heads. I want to see more visual storytelling, and the fact that animation is getting bigger budgets and more investment, I hope will bring us to that possibility.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Kai. The next question I would like to ask is that I think we're all kind of been involved in industries where the prestige hasn't been quite there for the past 50 years, I guess. And for comics to become so popular in the noughties and animation to be on the rise, would you argue, Mal, that comics right now is very mainstream? And the post-COVID and just the changing nature of, the decades passing, in that comics is just very normal and the prestige of it will continue to rise from here onwards.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of these funny things that comics is so many different things. Mm-hmm. Some things are mainstream, superheroes, but my big measure of how mainstream superheroes are is two of the biggest manga at the moment, My Hero Academia and One Punch Man, are basically both about mocking Western superheroes. I was like, superheroes are done. They're at saturation point when the Japanese are sending them back. It's
controversial opinion again, man.
It's just like they're full, all right. So yeah, it's almost like they're ubiquitous. Like they're literally everywhere. Like everything's got superheroes. But the funny thing is, comics, man, people still think stuff like the Avengers movie are weird nostalgic throwbacks. They don't realize that stuff in the Avengers movies are referencing comics that were made in the last 10 years. Like they think they're a bit more like the 21 Jump Street movie, where it's like, oh, you remember that thing from when you were a kid? They made a movie of it now. And there's so many people now, like Hollywood has sort of taken the superhero, and people see the superhero as a movie thing. When people talk about Marvel, they talk about the Marvel movies. Mm. When they talk about, I prefer Marvel over DC, they're talking about the movies. There's so much about the comics still being discovered. But again, you work in things in libraries and stuff. The awareness amongst kids is there. Like we're saying, the biggest selling comics is Dogman. The kids are all aware that there is an anime series they love, and they come in ready to buy the manga. They are aware that there is a manga. So there are these waves of different demographics, different segments of the market, targeting different types, different segments of the comics market, and their awareness is quite high. And then there are other segments like the superheroes and stuff where you just can't get it in your head how many people don't realize superhero comics are still being made. So it's a really weird layered thing about how ubiquitous they are. But again, one of the interesting things is traditionally comic books have a boom.
Feel free to take that after you
Sorry,
finish
man,
your thought.
I can't see the whole question, so it only came
that's
up a
fine.
segment.
I'll ask it to you later on.
Yeah,
now.
The comic books traditionally boom when there's an economic downturn, like through the Great Depression, and that you've always seen this weird boom of comics, and we didn't really get it hugely through the global financial crisis. Got it a bit, I suppose, but I think we're seeing it now in the pandemic, like what Sarah was talking about, that boom
that
of
is
graphic novel sales?
that is the nature of my question. Does that's the COVID-19 and what comes after it, has it opened our minds to a more escapist form of entertainment? I won't necessarily say that what comics and animation is escapist, but it's a different way of looking at the world. You mentioned that I work with libraries, and that's true, but I think currently and previously, there's still a certain element of snobbery amongst the, educated elitist types that comics is for kids and animation is for kids and it's not real literature. Mal, you've touched on that. There's another question I'd like to ask you just very quickly, is that you mentioned earlier the popularity of My Hero Academia and One Punch Man and how that has affected Japan. So do you think that the way that it reached Japan, was it through the cinema and the popularity of the Marvel Avengers movies, or did it come to Japan through comics?
That's a really good question. I honestly, I'm not familiar enough with the Japanese market to know for sure. But America and Japan have a really interesting history of pop culture flowing backwards and forwards. Very famously, Osamu Tezuka was inspired by Walt Disney's Bambi, and like that tradition of the really, really big eyes, big emotive eyes that he would always put on like Astro Boy and all of his characters is credited with his obsession with Bambi and the Disney stuff. And then you look at things like the Transformers toys expanded. Our Transformers and G.I. Joe have this weird backwards and forwards of licensing one for each country and then licensing it back, and Microman and G.I. Joe and Transformers and backwards and forwards. There's definitely an ebb and flow there as far as a pop culture exchange and leaders in each side taking a lead and running with it. As much as there are American artists, popular American artists who were clearly inspired by Japanese stuff, whether it's Frank Miller back in the 80s being inspired by Lone Wolf and Cub, or more modern street art style guys like Joe Mad and that, who are clearly inspired by various elements of the Japanese stuff as well. It could simply be that a particular creator got inspired and produced something that was just good enough that it worked. But I think having thought about it in the West, I imagine part of the reason My Hero and One Punch Man work is because you've got a base level of superhero literacy. And a good chunk of that's got to come from the movies. I
actually have to agree with Mal there. Just to answer your question directly, Kai, about the origins of Japan's interest in superheroes, I would have to argue it is very much the movies, starting with Spider-Man in about the early 2000s. My understanding is that Western comics, Amekomi as it was in Japan, it does not sell particularly well. There's an interesting anime called Skull Face bookseller Honda-san.
Really?
If you like,
so
slice of life comics about what it's like to work in a bookstore. In this case, this creator works in the real life creator. It's a story about her life. Works in the Kinokuniya in the manga section. So she is in charge of the Amekomi section, and from what I could tell, it sells, but largely because of the movies. So do check that anime out sometime if you're interested in a slice of life of what it's like to work in a Japanese bookstore manga department. But anyway, thanks very much for that, Mal. Sarah, while we like to get back on the subject of a snobbery, I think in a trade publishing, the comics, people probably love it, but I guess in traditional book publishing, there's a certain amount of snobbery still going on towards comics. But do you think that post-COVID, this attitude will be slayed and comics shall win the day?
I think we've been in the process of a big change over the past 5 years or so. I have friends in Perth who run a kids' art school, and their comic making classes are so immensely popular. They cannot offer enough classes for the amount of kids who want to take them. And libraries and schools are bringing in increasing amounts of comic makers as like guests for workshops and that sort of thing. And I think all of that is working to change the perception of comics and what they are as art or not art. And I do think that the big boost in sales can only help that at this point. And I'm hoping that this is a sign that people see that comics can be all sorts of things. And we also are lucky enough that like the kids who discovered, for example, Raina Telgemeier's earlier work, they're starting to grow up now and they want to keep reading comics as they get older. So that means that now publishers are trying to fill the gaps so they don't just have middle grade and then basic YA, that they have things for like their entire lives. So they want to have like young YA, they want to have older YA, they want to have like younger adult stuff and just kind of fill all of those gaps. And I think that's all really cool. And I think that'll help a lot because eventually those people will become parents and the people running literary awards and paying artists to be fancy guests at things. So yeah, I hope.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much, Sarah. We don't have that much time left, but Kai, do you think that animation will reach a parity with live action in terms of prestige in the post-COVID world?
Oh, I sure hope so. I think that animation is still much like a publishing book. It takes a couple of years to get there, so production is not going to go nearly as quickly as you do with, say, a sitcom, unless you go really, really, really basic and have the whole talking heads thing. Hopefully, the surge of interest in it, and particularly with 3D animation, like how much money did the Trolls movie make earlier this year? This sort of sleeper hit that just came out of nowhere. Now it's streaming. So I think there's always going to be advantages to doing live action over animation, in particular the speed at which you can get your actors to just get it done. But if it's a movie, I think we might see a shift over toward animation because it's safer and you can have more control over it, especially for directors in Hollywood. That's got to be a very appealing thing. If you can't get your actors to do the thing that you want, you can just redraw them in an animation. You don't have to spend much time worrying about performance. As opposed to like matching the prestige, I still think that Australian and American audiences in particular, like that whole sort of Western grouping, I think they still are trying to shake off the feeling that animation is for kids. But as Sarah so eloquently put it, we're seeing a lot of people who grew up with this material now having kids of their own and raising them in that. So hopefully in the future, we'll see more and more animated films being treated with the same class and prestige as motion pictures. Especially stuff like, you know, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time and those kind of big emotional hits.
Yeah, that's true. I think that streaming can in some ways be the great equalizer. With COVID-19, there could be the possibility of theaters dying permanently. Not because we want to, not because I want to, not because anyone wants to, but because they just have no money and people are afraid to go back into the theaters. Japan's kind of handled it, but there is the danger of the American theater chain AMC just going belly up within the next few months if the COVID situation in America doesn't magically fix itself. And even now in Australia, the cinemas aren't open. And so we are kind of limited to looking at Netflix when it comes to our, experience of our serialized and movie entertainment. And in some ways, I think the small screen has an equalizing effect on how people see whatever it is they're seeing. Be it animation or live action, a story is going to be judged entirely by its quality and of its writing and its production value. So I think that that may be an interesting factor into changing the way that people see live action versus animation, in that they realize at the end of the day, it is about good writing, good directing, and good production values. Yeah. So I think we're a bit out of time, but anyway, thank you to everybody for participating in this really interesting discussion. From what I could tell, that everyone thinks that the industry is very bright, despite some setbacks. And the fact that for some of you, the situation has changed what you're doing permanently, you all seem very optimistic about the future. So in closing, do anyone have any final words to say about their situation? And for anyone else who wants to do what you're currently doing, like, in Mal, in your case, open a comic book shop. So Mal?
Drop out of university. No, don't drop out of university. Don't open a comic shop.
Okay.
There's plenty of people who accidentally open comic shops, and they're very, very good at it. Don't aim for it.
Okay.
There's a whole bunch of awesome skills like what Kai and you and Sarah have. We simply facilitate those skills getting out in the world. So ultimately, yeah, keep working on skills is the big thing. Yeah, it's the stuff being produced is amazing. That's what makes my job easy.
Right. So. Thanks very much, Mal. Sarah, is it a great time to start putting pictures together for publishers if you're doing YA comics?
That's a tricky thing. Like, I definitely think that if that's your dream, you can absolutely still work toward it. But, for example, a lot of people who start out doing what I do make a lot of their money from shows, like sales at shows, because that's just one of the easiest ways to make cash when you're starting out. And those aren't around in the way that they used to be this year. And we don't know how long it'll take for them to get back to normal. So I think it'll take more finesse to make it work if that's what you want to try making your career right now. But it's definitely not hopeless.
Right, thanks. So Kai, good time to start an animation studio?
Good time to brush up on your skills. Good time to get into animation online. Twitter is very big. If you're an amateur editor, just get on Twitter. Just start posting your stuff. Study sakagaburu.net. And I don't mean any disrespect to academics, and I'm very impressed that you're moving on to your masters, but don't let academics tell you what to do.
Don't worry. I have free reign, so.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Because a lot of them said, oh, no, don't do that. You should do this other thing. And then I tried the other thing and it didn't work out. But then the thing I wanted to do worked out instead. So this is all good. You don't need to go to university to study to get these skills. Everything's available for you online. But yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think COVID is a great time to actually upskill yourself. I personally am particularly interested in merging comics with other media and also using kind of new technology to do comics. And so this was a good time for me to learn new software and see how I could push the boundaries of doing comics, and which is part of what I'm doing for my PhD next year. And just to clarify, Kai, I get paid to do whatever the heck I want because it's a PhD.
Hey, I wanted one, but they said no.
Yeah, well, yeah, it is a pretty, weird field, to be honest. Yeah, well, anyway, thank you so much to everyone for participating. Thanks to Kai, Sarah, and Mal. Thanks so much for taking your time to have this chat, and it's been a very fascinating talk.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
No, not at all. Thank you very much.
Inconceivable!